Oh, hang on a moment. I got a tweet to get one of those free accounts here. All right. I hope you all have tweeted and gotten your accounts in. I'm going to start a stopwatch. There we go. So hello there. I'm Rachel Nabors, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I used to be, well, I guess technically I still am an award-winning cartoonist. I, for many years, made a comic for a website called girl.com, and it was specifically for teenage girls by teenage girls. And this little fellow here, that's my alter ego with the red hair, known as Rachel the Great. And the little fellow she's holding, that's Tuna P. Katz. And I dare say he was the more popular of the two. And if I kept staying in comics, probably would have had his own spin-off series. So I was making comics up until around 2007. I won an award for Best New Female Talent in the industry, and everything was really cool. But then life struck, and I had to get health insurance and get a real job and all those things. And I was sad because one of my dreams was that one day my comics would be so popular, I would be able to have my own cartoon based on them. And I thought, well, now that I'm in web development, one day maybe I'll learn Flash and I'll make that happen. Well, I kept putting off learning Flash, and then I found out Flash was not the thing to learn anymore and said, all right, I'll learn JavaScript. I was crazy about CSS, always been a big CSS nerd. I know when people think of front-end developers, they tend to think of JavaScript developers, and this makes it really hard to interview for jobs, by the way, just really hard. But I was looking at this CSS3 spec one day, and I noticed that there was this property I could use to actually imitate keyframes, keyframe animation. And that's when the madness started, and eventually led to my quitting my job and traveling around at conferences and just showing this nifty thing. Eventually, I'll have to go get a real job again. But for now, animation. So let's start with a couple of assumptions today. What you're going to be seeing, we're using Chrome. These animations will work in all recent browsers, including IE 10-ish and 11. IE 10's animations can be a little persnickety. We'll be using prefix-free, so if you don't see prefixes, it's precisely because I'm using this handy script by Lee Veru. What it does is it goes into your, it detects what browser your visitors are using, goes into your style sheet, scans it for everything that needs a prefix, and then injects new prefix code into the head. It's really nice, but I don't recommend it for production animation or production development at all, because about once out of every 30 or 40 refreshes, the whole thing is borked. So it's much better if you're going to use prefixes to go ahead and use like Compass with Sass. And in that, I have actually made an extension called Animation Studio, which if you like the techniques you see today, this takes a lot of the math out of them. So first off, today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this talk is super awesome because it's a compilation of all of my best ofs from every other workshop and talk I have given in the past year and 3 months. So this is it. You guys are going to get it straight on. I'm going to talk to you about all the different cool things that come directly from animation that I've been using. And we're going to start with storyboards. Now, this is a picture I took, and I'm sorry about the glare. They had a lot of LCDs in this room, but this is from the Walt Disney Family Museum in California. And this is an example of one of the world's very first storyboards. Storyboards are a recent invention. Back in the olden days, when Disney was just making little shorts that played before movies, they would have a couple of animators that go off into their own rooms, and they'd work on their things separately, and then they'd come back together, and it's like, I've got a gag, and they'd stitch them together, and then they'd play that before a movie. And that was all very well and good until they decided to work on Snow White. You couldn't have people wandering off into their separate little coding holes, animation tables and working on individual projects and then coming together because, this dance sequence isn't going to flow into that dwarf sequence at all. So they invented storyboards, which were just illustrations like this, pinned to corkboards that they could lift up and haul over to another studio, plop down, and let new set of animators work on it. So anytime you needed to work with time and talent, it really helped. I like to think of it as prototyping with the fourth dimension, that is the dimension of time. So now these storyboards are used not only in animation, but they're used in film, they're used in interaction design, we use them in comics, anything that involves times and teams. It's a good idea to bring out a storyboard. Here's an example of a storyboard I used for a little music video, which I use in an example all the time. As you can see, I've got the loading page and exactly what happens when. It's all illustrated. I even, if you click on it, have a little description and image to let people know exactly what goes where. I was the only person on this team, but I still found it very useful to have all of this information at my fingertip. And I'll actually show you guys the music video. This is all, by the way, CSS3 animations and HTML5 audio. Hang on. And it just loops like that forever. I know some people... Thank you guys so much. So that animation would not be possible without that storyboard I showed you. So they save you time, they help you figure out timing, and they give you a great overview of a project, so it's easy to make changes, and it helps you break a project down to distribute amongst teams. So you notice the cat walking out. I'm sorry to say that I did not beat Razvan at being the first person to show a cat today, which is so sad because it's all about the cat. But anyway, let me show you how I got Tuna to walk across the screen there. This is something that in animation we refer to as the walk cycle. And the walk cycle is, oh, darn it, that's not the right video. I had this problem last night, and I thought I fixed it. It's not being my friend. There it is. Sweet. Got it. So you see, if you complain at the computer long enough, it does what you want. So walk cycles are like the hello world of animation. When kids go to animation school, they spend like their first year working on a walk cycle, and they're really proud and excited about it at first. I didn't go to animation school, but I watched the suckers who did. And they get really proud and excited about it, and then 2 weeks in, they're like, God, why am I still doing this? It's insane. It's like 24 frames just to get this to happen. This is a walk cycle, and oh, God, stupid escape button, you're ruining it. So this is a walk cycle of the rather famous character Rogue from the X-Men. Who watches the X-Men? Woo! And, or reads the X-Men. Yeah, whatever. All right, so this is from the series X-Men Evolution, which is a cartoon based on a comic. See, bleed over, comics turning into cartoons, dreams crushed. And she's a character, Rogue, my favorite character, and she's designed by this, that walk cycle was done by master animator and character designer Stephen K. Gordon, whose work you have seen many, many, many times if you've ever watched cartoons. He's a big fan of rotoscoping, oddly enough, but that is some of his work. After you've done one of these, you actually never want to do one again and understand why so much animation work is outsourced. It's simply not worth the amount of time it takes a person in a first world country to draw this. So here is how I made that happen. That's Tuna. He's walking it. He's strutting it. Yeah. So what is going on under the hood here? As you can see, I just have a Tuna div up here. There's nothing major special going on there. It's all down to the animations. Let me see if I can make this just a little bit prettier. Is that that's legible? All right. So we've got a keyframes block down here. Now, how many of you have at least used a keyframes block at least once? Raise your hands. Okay. I'll get into some depth for the rest of you guys. All right. So CSS animations work like this. You define a keyframes block. In this case, we're calling it walk cycle. And inside that, you define which properties you want it to start with and which properties you want it to end with in your 0% and 100% locations. You could also label them as start and finish or start and end, something like that. I use 0% and 100% because I like working with numbers. So in this case, we're just using a huge background sprite. Let me show it to you. Yeah, well, we're only using this side of the background sprite. You can see that he's got the sitting animation you saw me using earlier. You can stack these animations so that you can have him go from walking to sitting. And here I've got one that goes between him running and an actual running sprite over there, which I use in a different one, which we'll probably look at in a few. So let's see. Where did I go? There we go. No, that's not it. I'll show you that later, guys. So anyway, you define these. Basically, what we're doing is we're repositioning the background sprite. We're starting with it at 0, 0, and then we're jumping all the way down its length. Now, the magic is right here in this little timing function called steps. Usually, when you define an animation, it uses ease in. And you get something like that, which is how very early animations were done. So a little bit of animation history there. But when we use steps, what's happening is that the timing function, instead of just starting at point A and moving everything to point B, it chops up those properties into, in this case, 12 different stops, and then it hops between them. So you get this lovely, smooth interaction. Well, it looks smooth because I've designed it to look smooth. You could make it look choppy. I was just talking with Anna, and turns out that if you look at some of her examples, she uses steps to help change sizes and add elements to her cylinders at the same time. If you use something like linear, it would look very weird while she was doing that. So check out those and look for the steps. And in case you want to see how that works, it's basically a name. Oh yeah, I should have probably shown you guys the duration too. Yep. So here's the name. This is the duration. We want it to run for 1 second. And how many times we want it to loop. We could just say happen once, and it would do that. But I like him to keep walking forever. We'll get to you. All right, so cutouts. This is the best example of cutouts I could find. This is actually from a demonstration of how Flash animation works. But these are different symbols or sprites that are being layered to create a face that has eyes and a nose and a mouth. And you can change the mouth to give the illusion of speech. And there's some blinking eyes and such. And you composite them, and you get this face that changes. So instead of having to draw that same face a bajillion different times, like we had to back in the olden days of Steamboat Willie, where Mickey Mouse was moving in every panel, that's because every panel was a new drawing. They weren't doing anything very economically back in those days. It wasn't until the 1960s that people started making things using a technique called cutouts. It was pioneered by a company called Hanna-Barbera, and it was originally developed, I think, in Japan, probably by Osamu Tezuka, a grandfather or god of all Japanese animation. And I'm going to show you an example of it. I want you to keep an eye on what parts of these animations are moving and what parts aren't. We're going to skip ahead a little bit.
This is Bed.
All right.
It's working, Fred. It's working.
Oh, wait, that's 140.
Citizens of Bed traffic light.
And here's our chance.
Stone Age transportation
Here we
is
go.
highly advanced with the invention of the 4-engine jet.
Fire engine 1. Fire 1.
All right, here it comes.
Here she comes, Barney.
There's not much moving in this. Look at how terrible and jolty that
Let
was.
him go, Barney. How do you think that's safe, Fred?
The only part of that animation that's smooth is the movement of the mouth. When they had them actually turning and looking, you could just see that the animators were like, oh, this is like drawing a walk cycle. Why am I working here? So anyway, by just moving the mouth, you're seeing you're saving a lot of time there. And you'll notice that most characters from that era have like a collar or something that chops off their head and separates it from the rest of their body. So you can have a person standing there and only their head is moving, but it doesn't look weird. If you want to learn more about that, there's this really cool video out from the Escapist called The Importance of Yogi's Collar, which goes into great depth. And once you see it, you will never watch cartoons from your childhood again quite the same eyes. So doing cutouts with CSS, I'm going to show you a sprite. I blow it up. So as you can see, this is the tuna from the end of that music video. He's got his little headset on, and a cute face, and a cute mouth, right? And down here you can see he's got two slightly different expressions where he's going to get lower lids, kind of go from this happy open expression to kind of a grinning, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, kind of expression. And these, basically what I did was I put a div over his face, and then I used the steps technique to flick over those different states. Come on, you. There we go. I can show you exactly the code I used to do that. Yeah, he's got the wiggly eyebrows. Good kitty. So it's just an expression nested in here. And I couldn't help but this morning when we were talking about shadow DOM elements, I was like, yes, I can finally clean up those horrible, horrible stringy divs inside my animations. Just put a tuna on the page, and I can keep all that hidden and nice and tidy. I like that. Nobody will care, but I like that. So anyway, down here, as you can see, it's the keyframe smirk, and the numbers for this one are just a little bit less pretty than the ones you saw before because it is an irregularly shaped sprite, and I have to do a little bit of finagling to jump between it without getting strange loopiness. Woot. So scene transitions. There's got to be somebody who watches My Little Ponies in here. Yay, there we go. Pinkie Pie. All right, so she is obviously fighting what we refer to as an iris wipe in animations. Once again, you're giving me the wrong video, guy. Yeah, it'll come back. So anyway, scene transitions. You'll notice, like when you're watching a cartoon, especially they're used a lot in cartoons or in feature-length films, especially poorly directed ones. Scene transitions are there to help patch over when you're trying to move someone from one frame of mind or point of reference into a different point of reference. For instance, scene transitions usually signify change in thought, narrative, mood, time, or location. And I just wanted to show you a cute little example of one.
Hello! An original scene transition. Interesting.
They can be really inventive. That was from Ed, Edd and Eddy, which is, I never watched, but it's no longer on TV. It's still pretty good, though. So I like to think of them as like a full stop between sentences, or like the space between paragraphs. It's a way of saying, I have finished with this idea, and I'm starting a new one. Please disregard what came before, but keep it in mind. Let's just go on to another thing now. This is actually something I would like to see taken into account with more in UI development. I know we use a lot of fade-ins and fade-outs for user interfaces, but if we thought about it more like a director thinks about using these transitions, I think we could come up with some more powerful ways of dragging users out of their current frame of mind, which might be like I'm editing a paper, and into a second frame of mind, which is I'm reading the paper to see if I got all my edits in correctly. So instead of just having like I am typing in the word processor, save, and then the page completely blinks out to a new page. Maybe it would be nice to fade out and then fade in the new page, like you're in a different frame of mind now. That's how I would think about it. So here are a bunch of them. I want you to spot how many you can see. Oh no, it's not big enough. Hang on, I've got to make it bigger. Oh, what is... Oh, no, it won't let me log in. You're supposed to be in the gigantic version. Fine, come here. So there were a couple of fade-outs and fade-ins there. We saw that there was the iris wipe that zoomed in on her, and then we ended up switching over to somebody else's point of view, and then we faded out so that we could come back to our original character. This is a project called The Black Brick Road, which the artist and inventor of is over here. Her name is Zamag. She's Russian, and she hasn't even graduated from high school yet. It's amazing. I am still not convinced that she's just not some 42-year-old animation troll out there trying to pull everyone's leg. But this was number 11 of her installment, and I drew this to kind of look like her because I thought she was super cute and I wanted to match. I made this part down here. But the rest of her cartoons are really cool. She basically draws comics and has little interactive bits, and she'd been doing the interactive bits in Flash and putting them on deviantart.com. And I'd been following her work, and I was like, hey, would you like to collaborate on something? Because I see you're using a lot of Flash, and I could make something that, it could actually read on an iPad. This does look pretty good on an iPad, by the way. It's pretty fun. And she came back to me, and she said, yeah, I would love to do that. Here, I've got this gigantic project. You take care of it. And I did. And I'm really excited that web apps are becoming more and more widely adopted. Kindle Fire now accepts web apps on their store, which means you can look forward to maybe being able to buy the full version of this as a Kindle Fire app one day in the near future. I would like that and get her some money for her efforts. So anyway, enough showing off other people's work. It's my code, it's her art. Let's move on. Oh, and basically for that wormhole, you might be wondering, how did I get that iris swipe? I banged my head against that one for a long time. I got really sick of it. So basically, what it is I made this huge image, and I start with it scaled up so large that the entire scene fits right in here. And then I just animate the background scale on it to make it shrink to fit the entire thing. And this is all very carefully done so that as it scales in, this positions exactly over her. It's fairly simple, but it's not the sort of thing you'd think about doing unless you had this particular use case. So let's talk Parallax. Parallax, it's so popular right now, but I think it's kind of overdone. But that doesn't matter. Even though I think it's overdone, everyone else is excited about it, so I'm going to tell you how it is. This machine here is called what is it? Hang on a minute. A multi-plane camera, and it was invented by Ub Iwerks, who actually was the original animator of Mickey Mouse. Walt Disney actually their studios did a lot of innovation for their time. In fact, I would even say that the spirit of animation back during the Disney golden years is not unlike the spirit we are experiencing in front-end development today. A lot of cool new things were made. One of the things they complained about was when they were doing scenes of like a sweeping landscape and they wanted to zoom in on a house or something, if there was a sun or a moon or a point of reference in the distance, as they zoomed in, it got larger too. In reality, when we look into the distance, the sun doesn't get bigger, it stays the same. So they needed a way to imitate this. They needed a way for things in the foreground to get bigger without things in the background getting bigger too. So that they could make those wonderful opening scenes that you saw in Bambi, when you're moving through the forest and it actually looks like the forest is moving around you. Or the scene where Peter Pan and Wendy are flying over London. It costs a small fortune to use this. Basically what would happen is they put the very, very background down here, and then they would put different panes on top of it. And each one of these is a different sheet of glass that had something painted on it. And then they would meticulously move each of these. There's a camera mounted up top, and they take a photo. And they do this over and over again. Of course, you can do this in Flash, no trouble at all these days. But back then, this was pretty heavy stuff, and they did a great job of it. And then during hard times, they scraped off all the paint from those glasses, and, well, very few of the backgrounds from Bambi exist to this day. But the interesting thing is that glass discolors the paint, so they had to use very special paints that were particularly keyed to be just bright enough to offset that discoloration, depending on what level the glass was on. It was very mathy work. So anyway, let's have a look at this in action, because I've been talking about it, but I want to show you what it's like. I even got this in German, just for you guys. It's the last unicorn. This is all Parallax. Can you feel the majesty? Website, don't you? And now for some really obvious examples. You could tell they weren't quite ready to let go of the parallax yet.
Ich fühle mich seltsam in diesem Wald.
So much Parallax.
Tiere in einem
There you go.
Einhornwald lernen mit der Zeit alle selbst ein bisschen zaubern. Vor allem, was das Verschwinden betrifft.
Einhörner? Ich dachte, die gibt es nur im Märchen. Das ist ein...
Actually, I totally lied. I originally had used the German version so people would pay more attention to the parallax than they would to the dialogue. But anyway, you could tell that in the foreground, things were moving slower. In the background, they're moving a lot faster. That is to give the illusion of depth. And I don't know, how many of you have been to the mountains or you've seen like sweeping mountainous vistas in your life? Okay. It's something you probably notice from taking a drive. You'll notice, like, I was raised in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, so I'm used to this scene where you're driving in a car and the mountains in the background are hardly moving at all, everything is racing past around you. And I did the same thing for this particular animation. I'll show you the full version if I've got the time. Ooh, I might not. So anyway, as you can see, cat's walking up front, and in the background, everything is moving at a different rate. This is simply, you've got a foreground here, that's tuna. I mean, we've got the foreground of the grass running in front of tuna. We've got the midground that contains tuna, that's him and the grass right behind him. And then there's the background. And the background is all those mountains. And as you can see, let's see, background. The background is just a pile of different mountains layered on top of each other, and they're different lengths, and their background positions all move over the same period of time. I run this Parallax BG keyframe over 40 seconds ad infinitum. Let me show you a little diagram of how this works. There we go. So as you can see, the things in the background, they're shorter, so they have less distance to go. They waddle along, and the ones in the front have to go faster to catch up. Reminds you of planets circling suns in that regard. There's some physics involved. So let's see. You can also do this with 3D transforms. I'm not going to bother to show you guys that article just yet. There's a really cool example of this, which I may show at the end. But I promised someone I was going to show my version of Alice in Wonderland. So let's talk cushioning, easing, timing functions. You will hear these words thrown a lot. They are all exactly the same thing. In animation, timing functions, when we talk about CSS3 animations and transitions, we often talk about timing functions or easing. Well, in animation, that's always been called cushioning, or I think one time slowing, as in slow in, slow out. Ease in, ease out. And here's an example of, well, you can think of it this way. When you drop a ball, it goes from slow to fast. As it increases its velocity as it falls towards the center of the Earth, or whatever the center of gravity on wherever you're running the experiment is happening. When you think about rolling a ball across the surface, it slows down because of friction taking away its momentum. That is, if you try to do any of these animations using I'll show you. Here's an example of a bouncing ball animation where it doesn't start right at all. That's linear easing. Oh my God. It's a little better. There, that's some extreme characterization there. I'm going to leave it on that because that's funny. All right, so there's a really cool article about applying that kind of science to UI design and how you can come up with a much more natural feeling interface by keeping in mind that things move in a certain way. We're used to them moving in a certain way. And that kind of subtle skeuomorphism, it really does make a difference in how well people relate to a product. And I'm going to give you a little example of this. This is just using transitions to roll a ball. As you can see, it's slowing down. It's kind of natural, right? But I want you to see how much more unnatural this looks when I change, let's see, ball, ball, ball. Come on, ball. Where did I put my transitions? I feel like an old man. All right. So that was a nice timing function. But if I change it to linear, which just starts at the same rate and ends at the same rate, it looks very unnatural. And you can even roll your own using this. There are many different kinds of transitions, but if you need a very special kind, you can roll your own using cubicbezier.com. I have actually had to use this from time to time. All right. So before I show you my last little set here, so why it kicks ass. I've been talking to you a lot about these things. Well, number one, it's familiar. You already have these tools. You already know how to animate things. You're front-end developers. You work with CSS all the time. There's nothing stopping you from making things move and shake in the browser. You don't need to learn ActionScript or anything like that. CSS is perfectly capable of most of the things you're going to want to do. And what I've just shown you has helped these techniques stick in your head better than if I just showed you a bunch of W3C specs, which, I'll be honest, if I hadn't been reading them, it wouldn't have occurred to me to do that. But I wouldn't want everyone to have to read the full spec to realize what steps exactly does. It's a lot of fun. And lastly, I'd like to think that content is so much more than copy. The browser is not just a document reader. And right now, we're doing all sorts of things with web apps that really stretch what browsers are capable of and what they can be expected to do. This is why you really need to be paying attention to the sorts of things that you can animate and make move on the screen. It's not enough just to know typography anymore. You have to understand motion design and interaction. You really do. So with these kinds of skills, you can build all kinds of nifty little things, including I promised I was going to show my version of Alice in Wonderland. Here it is. It's still in progress, so pardon if it looks weird. It's just a little something I'm working on. So you can see, I didn't bother to. I believe in showing the story instead of telling the story raws. So as you can see, much superior. Oh, he's a very busy rabbit. Oh no, where is that bunny going? Parallax. I'm scrolling at. A transition. And she's not in Kansas anymore. So anyway, thank you guys for listening. If you'd like to know more about this, I am giving a masterclass workshop on these animations in October. You can find out all about this and read these slides at share.rachelnabors.com/animationpower. I am available for work, and I hope that I've inspired you to be doing more with your user interfaces and spend more time on perfecting those small animations in the future.